Hello there everyone. Today I'm going to show you how to make these earrings. So this is what they look like. So basically what I've done is made a frame of wire, and obviously I have my earring findings, and then made a coil that I've then opened up slightly and used that coil to add threading to the piece, and then you can end up with something like this. So it's kind of like your threading technique. Peruvian threading, or ganutelle is known as well. You can end up with something like this. Obviously you can do your own colour choices completely, but then this thread particularly has a really nice sheen to it, a bit metallic, so I think it can give a really nice look. And obviously you can play around the technique as well. This is just a basic one that I've done here, so the style of it. So if you want to learn how to make this pair of earrings, or even use it as a pendant if you want, then keep watching. So these are the things that we're going to need. Now what I have here is 2 gauges of regular round wire, and I'm just working with a silver coated wire here. The first one is a 1mm thickness. Now this is going to be the frame of the piece, so we need this to have nice strength and structure to it. The other one here is a 0.4mm. This is the one I'm going to make my coil with, that we're going to be able to weave a thread in between. Now as for the thread, you can use loads of different types really. What I'm using here that you might be able to find most easily is actually embroidery thread. You can also get it in so many different colours and finishes, so there's loads of choice. And what I actually do with it, I don't use it as it is. You'll find when you look at embroidery thread, it's made up of several different threads to be made into that one length of thread. What I actually do is then separate it out, and then you get a really fine thread, and that's what I want to use. You don't want to use too thick of a thread, so if you separate these out you get some really fine ones, so you can get multiple lengths out of the one. Then also we need our jump rings and our earring findings here. I'm just using some regular drop and back butterfly back earring findings. So let's get it all together and let's get started. So I just wanted to show you what I mean here. So you get your embroidery thread, so this one you then get to the end, and you can see here you've got lots of different threads within the same one. Then all you do is spend a bit of time, choose one out, pick one out here, and then you want to start unraveling from the other ones. So just take it and then start unraveling it here. So you can do it in a few different ways, whatever you find easy really. Roll it a bit helps. I also find that if you then kind of stay focused on that, you can pull it a little bit, not too much because then it's going to get all tangled up. You want to be careful with that. Find where you can find that single thread that you're dealing with. So I have it right here. Then get hold of that a little bit further down and then pull it all the way through. So you're picking it out from the rest, as you can see here. I then have this length separated out. So it's just to try and find the fastest and easiest way to separate it out, because it does take just a little bit of time. But just you want to separate that one little tiny thin thread out from the rest here, and that's what we're going to be using to make the threading with. So the wire that we'll need to make these earrings is, first of all, per earring we need one length of 1mm thickness wire here, and this is about 22 centimeters long. Now the length of this will really depend on how large you want your piece to be, but this is the length that I'm going to be using. And then as for the 0.4mm wire, what we need to do with that is actually make a length of coil here. So what I have here is just the 0.4mm that's just been coiled with the gizmo tool. So I've used this tool here and then this rod to then make my gizmo coil. So it gets made on the rod here, and you just slide it on and off. Take it off when you're done. Now I have a video where I show how to use this tool in more detail, and what I've done is I'm using the deluxe one where you get 5 size rods. To get this perfect size for the gauge wire that we're using, so the 1mm, I've used the second smallest rod. So that's the thickness of the rod there, the diameter. Because what we basically need is the diameter of this coil to be just a bit larger than the diameter of the base wire that we're using, so the 1mm thickness there. So that's why I'm using these things, and like I said, I have a video where I show more detail. And what I've just done is I've done a coil on the full length of my rod, so completely filled it out, and then I've cut that coil in half when I've taken it off the rod, and then I've used each of these halves to make one earring. So one full length of coil will get you both earrings done. So we need this coil as well. And then before we start adding in any of our thread, we need to make our frame first. So what we need to achieve is something that looks a bit like this. So in this case I'm just going for a teardrop shape. So to do this we need to start out with getting out the length of 1mm wire here, and we need to get this into the shape first of all that we want. So I'm just going to work with the curve that's already in the wire, you might as well. I'm going to gently start making that teardrop shape. And then when you're making the first one, you can just make it the way you want it to be. But then once you've made the first one, you can make your second one and basically compare it to the first one, so you make sure they get as close to the same size and shape as possible. So I'm going to grab the first one that I've already prepared here, and then I need to use this basically a bit as a template to then get the same size and shape as close to as you can get, really. It's probably not going to be 100% perfect ever, but just get as close as you can, where you're then crossing one of the tails over the other one here by the top at the point of the teardrop shape. So keep making your shape here until you're happy with it, and when you're making your second one here, until it matches up with the first one as much as possible. So something a bit like this. So when we're happy with the shape here, then what we need to do is get the coil ready, because we're not actually using it the way it is. Here we're just, you can see it's come straight off the rod that we made it on, and it's a tight coil. Now what we need is to actually space it out, because it's actually the spaces in between the coils here, as we're pulling it apart a little bit, that's going to be kind of the ridges we need to put a thread into. So to do that, we need to take the coil here, and then all you do is keep hold of each end, just gently. You don't want to squish it, but keep nice and tight hold, and then you want to then gently start pulling it out. Don't go too wild, because we want to do it gently and try and get it even as well. We don't want to pull it too far either, so the gaps are too large. We want nice and even, fairly small gaps really. And this way the coil gets longer as well. So keep pulling gently until you feel your gap to the right point, where you feel the gaps are just right for what we want. So what you can always do is just compare the two coils as well. If it seems similar, you might just pull it out a little bit more. But like I said, you don't want to be pulling it out too much, so the gaps become too large. Or something a bit like this. Seems perfect. So now we're going to use this coil to then add on to the frame that we've already kind of prepared here. And what I'm going to do is just slide this onto the 1mm wire, and it goes straight on there because the sizes fit perfectly that I used. So like I said, the size rod fits perfectly with the 1mm wire that we're using for this. And obviously it'll go overlapping now. It'll go, the coil itself is too long for what we need, but that's what we need to then adjust now. We then have the coil onto here. Then what we need to do is start deciding basically this crossover point where the base wires cross over. That's where we need the coil to stop. So what we need to do is just keep hold of where that is. I've kind of put a nail in between one of the ridges where I want it to end. And then we can just, you can get a pair of pliers and just cut off a little bit further up. Only the coil. I don't want to cut it off all the way down here because I want to use the end a bit again. Just cut off the excess there. And then I basically want to undo the rest. So I'm just pulling it out, keeping hold of this one down here that I want to keep. So all this stays intact. I'm just separating this out. So I just want to find the end. It's right there on the other side. Just grab hold of that with my pliers, it's a bit easier. And basically I want to just undo this, the rest of it. But only down to where I said I'm keeping hold of it. Because I'm just going to be using this end to also help attach the coil onto the frame so it doesn't keep moving around while we keep working with it. So just undo it here, and don't worry about it being neat because this is just to use to secure with. and right down to the last one, just like that. You can always just straighten it out a little bit, just gently like that. So that end is now ready. So what we need to do is do the same with the other end. So you find out where that crossover point is, keep hold just in between those coils, and then you can pull out the rest and then just undo that as well. It's for the exact same purpose as the other one, just to make sure we have something to secure them so the coil doesn't move around, because otherwise that can cause a bit of a problem when we're going to start adding in the thread. So just undo it all the way down to here where I'm keeping hold of it, and there we go. So now I'm ready to then attach the base wires together. So what I'm going to do is just get these out of the way, the 0.4mm, just point them out in the direction so they're out of your way to be able to then do the next step here. And what we need to do is this point where the base wires cross over each other, I'm just going to take my chain nose pliers and put a bend in to begin with to make it a bit easier to fasten them. So I'll place my pliers where I want my bend to be, and I'm just doing it on the wire that's going around the front. Something a bit like that, just a bit for now. And then also the wire behind here, this is then just a longer one of mine, I want to bend that so it's actually, instead of pointing out to the side, I want it to be bending upwards. So make sure everything just sits right when you're doing these bends, because that's what's going to make the final shape how we want it. So I grab hold of the wire behind there, just the base wire, the 1mm wire, and then point it straight upwards. So look from the front, something like that. So when this wire that we bent towards the back is crossing over the front, they're kind of going to end up hooking together like that. Make sure your coils are pushed down on both sides so they're not under this wrap that we're going to do. We want that to be free. And basically what we need to do now is wrap this end, the short one in my case that I bent backwards, around the other one. So just like this, because this is just securing the frame in place. So obviously it's not going to keep moving, and especially when we start doing the threading, we need the basic frame to be just how we want it to be and nice and secure. And just tighten it. You wrap here all the way around, and it's enough to just wrap a couple of times really. And you can push them close together to make sure it's nice and neat. Something like that, and your shape can go a little bit out of shape while you're doing this, while you're working with it. If it's trying to keep a bit of a light grip, but if it does go out of shape, you can just put it back in shape once we've done this. Like that, and then I'm going to cut off the excess towards the back here. Chop that off, and then always when you cut wire off, make sure to always tuck in the very end so it's not sticking out or anything. Feel it with your finger. And then there we go, that's that in place. So then what I want to do, just be careful with these lengths, then what I want to do is, we obviously need something here on the top to be able to attach to the earring finding. So all I'm going to do up here is actually just a basic wrap loop. So what I'm going to do is again grab my chain nose, I want to go a little bit above the last wrap that I just did with that previous wire. So we're leaving a bit of space in between. Then I'm going to bend my wire out to the side, put about a 90-degree angle in that, I'm close to, so there we go. And then I'm going to, in this case I'm going to be using some 6-step bell making pliers just to make sure I get the same size loop, but you can use round nose pliers, whichever, doesn't matter, works the same. This I just make sure that I get the same perfect size loop that I want on both. Whereas the round nose pliers are obviously tapered, so that can be a little bit more difficult. So I need to then take the long end of my wire, take it back around the pliers to make my loop all the way around the back to basically get a full circle And then to finish it off, I'm going to grab my chain nose pliers, clamp down on that loop to make sure it doesn't lose its shape, and then just continue wrapping with this end of the wire, basically filling in that little gap that we left. So this is just basically a basic wrap loop. And doing the wraps here on the loop instead of like an open loop makes it much more secure. And we're filling it in here. And then at the back, when I'm running out of space, I'm going to cut off the excess, and that is then going to meet up with the wire that we previously cut off. So something like that. And again, always just squeeze it in. So there we go. Make sure you always feel it. If you can't feel anything, it's fine, but if you can, you just want to tuck it in a bit more. And make sure the coils here are nice and squeezed together. So there we go. Now what we have left is the coil in here. You can see, because we haven't attached it yet with these ends, it's kind of loose, moving up and down. So imagine if we didn't have these ends to attach it now. Once we put the threading, we're going to start doing the threading, this will keep moving and it wouldn't really work very well. So we need to secure it. And to do that, I'm just going to hold the coil as much in place as I can, and then all we need to do is wrap these ends that we undid around. Just want to make sure that they're spaced out. You want to wrap it around basically just below these wraps that we did up here to secure the base wires in place. And because obviously it's a point formula wire we're doing this with, it blends in fairly nicely. It's not going to be too obvious compared to the 1mm wire. So there we go. Then wherever you kind of find a gap you feel you can tuck it in, you can then cut off the excess. So you only needed that small little bit extra to be able to attach it. Again, tuck it in. And do the same on the other side. So pull your coil where you want it to sit, and then wrap this end that we undid around the bottom. And same principle, get towards somewhere where you feel you can tuck it in, cut off the excess, and then just tuck in that little end of the wire. Just nicely like that. So there we go. That is basically a frame ready and done. So you now have both of them here with the coil on them. So this is now completely ready to start doing the threading onto them as well. So then once you have your frame ready here, and we made both of them so they're as even as possible, then what I've done is I've gotten my thread ready as well. So separated out the length of thread that I'm going to use from the embroidery thread that I told you. And I'm just going to start working with my red one here. Obviously the colour choice is completely up to you. But what we need to do first is attach this piece of thread onto the frame before we can then start working with it and making our design. So what I'm just going to do is start on one side, put one end through, and we just basically need to fasten it by making some knots. So take it through the frame and all the way up to the very top tip of the teardrop there, because that's where I want to start from. Then I'm just going to tie some knots here to fasten it. Start off with a regular knot just to get it in the right place and get it sitting all the way up. And just make sure you get it to sit exactly where you want it to. Right at the first knot it can be just a little bit fiddly, but once we get it tightened here, then it's much easier. So that's the first one. And now we want to make sure it's going to stay where we want it to and not obviously come undone. So I'm just going to tie some more knots around that same place on the frame. And I'm also going to do some surgeon's knots. So that's where I go through my knot once, just like a regular one, but then I go through it again with the same length, and that's going to be a surgeon's knot. And that's just sometimes a bit more secure, I find. So I'm just going to make sure to do that. Pull it tight, so basically down on the other side of the frame, the inside. Again, just make sure your knot always falls in the right place. Tighten that. And then it's really up to you how you want to do your knots. You can just do a few here. I want to make sure that my long length comes back up towards the top. So what I'm just going to do is tie another regular knot on the inside on top of the one that I just did. Just like that, tighten that. And then I want to tie my last knot around the top here. So you can do a single, you can do a surgeon's knot. I'm going to start with a surgeon's knot. Fasten that down. And then I like to just do a single one on top of that. And then I'm going to have that be my last knot. So it's really just a matter of fastening it how you feel it's going to stay nice and secure. So there we go. I've now fastened it with knots, but what I want to do is make sure these knots aren't going to come undone either while we're working with it or after we've made it, obviously. So to make sure of that, I'm going to get out my glue, and in this case I'm using the GS Hypo Cement, mainly because first of all it dries clear, so you won't be able to see it. It's going to be very easy to hide anyway, because we don't obviously want a big glob of white glue or something, so this dries clear. But then also this has a really fine precision knot hole tip, which is really helpful for this because I only just want a little bit just around the knots. So I'm just going to take this and place it right where I want the glue. So that's really the main reason that I'm using this glue, because I only want a little bit just right around the knots, and I don't want to then obviously get it all over the place. Just like that. And then you just want to leave that to dry, cut off the excess of the short tail here, and then once you've done that, we've got it ready to then start making our threading. So now that we then have the thread ready here, so just the long end left, then what we need to do is start making the threading, and it's pretty easy, to be honest. What we just got to do is obviously you decide what colours you want to use, but then decide what pattern you want to use, and you can always play around with this more and build on it even more. But what we're going to do is I'm going to start from up here where I have attached the thread. That's my starting point, and I'm going to basically go around and around the whole time, but then moving my thread along the way. Now what we want to do is we look in here, that's the midpoint at the top, and then down here is about the midpoint on the bottom. What I want to do is not go straight to the midpoint, I want to go a little bit to the side of that midpoint on the bottom, but on the same side as where I'm starting, so not the other side, on the same side there. And then I'm going to go through, we'll catch my thread inside of one of those open coils, which is why we added that coil but opened it up a bit so the thread would fit inside of them. I'm just going to place my thread there. Then what we need to do is come back up to the top where we started out, and this part can be the fiddliest just to get started, but what you want to make sure to do is throughout try and keep holding a nice tension on your thread here, because when you let go, obviously it's going to let go of the frame as well because we're not attached it yet. So just keep hold of it, hold nice tension onto it, go back up to the top then, and then we want to go into the very next gap. So find the next gap, not the first one then where you attached it, but the very next one that we kind of run into. So the next one down, and then to come back down again, we're going across the top, and this time we need to move over towards the other side on that side of the first piece we've done down here. So we'd go just, in my case the way I'm looking at it is just to the left of the previous wrap. So always have a nice close look. You want to make sure to go into the very next gap on your coil. Back up to the top again. Now we're moving downwards on this side, so that's to the right on this bottom side and to the left up on the top. Make sure you go into the very next gap and keep nice tension, because when you let go the whole thing can come apart, which is why I find as well it's quite handy to, when we're here where I've got my fingers in hand anyway behind the piece, I keep hold of it with my finger here behind, because that helps if I end up letting go here. I can both take a break, but also if I let go by accident I've still got hold of it. So place it there, go down to the next one, the bottom moving one step to the left, to the top, one to the right, down to the bottom, one step to the left, And I'm just saying top and bottom because I know it's kind of the other way around the way we're looking at it, but because I've got it flipped over, so I'm actually holding my finger where the top is. And you just basically keep going like this, always making sure that you grab the very next gap in your coil. And you can just always reposition, make sure you keep hold of your thread though. Don't let it go, because then you'll just have to start over, which isn't a big deal because we're obviously just using the same thread anyway. It's not going to ruin the piece. We just have to do it again. Go all the way over to the other side, and basically what we need to do is fill in this whole thing. So I take one step at a time until on the other side here I then reach this one when we're wrapping down on the what's currently the bottom here. When this point gets all the way up the side up to the very top, so right on the other side of the wrap as where we started out, that's where we need to get to. And you just keep going. That's why you want to make sure that your thread, you don't have loads of knots or tangles in it if you can help it. So obviously if you run into that along the way and you have to undo it, you're going to risk losing grip up here with what you've already done and have to start over. So it's much easier if we make sure there isn't any tangles or knots in the first place. Moving away all the way across, up the other side. You can see we're gradually filling in more and more, and even though it's quite a thin thread we're using, it's surprisingly filling in quite a bit of colour here on the piece, because they are being placed quite close together, close to each other, and then obviously crossing over there in the middle. But it fills in really nicely and gives nice bright colour. In this case obviously I'm using the red, but it really gives a nice big impact of the colour even though the thread is so fine, and you wouldn't really expect that. Straighten my thread out. Just always check, make sure you're going into the correct gap, you're not skipping one. Keep building our way. I'm just gonna, there we go, you see? I just lost grip a little bit and it unraveled a bit, but thankfully not too much. So I can just pick it back up. I can see this one actually just went into the wrong one as well. So there we go. So that can easily happen, and it's not a big deal. If it only did just a little bit unraveling, then obviously it's easy to pick back up, but you could risk that it would unravel completely, but you're just going to have to do it again then. It's not a big deal, it doesn't take too long anyway. Moving all the way up the other side, and then we're starting to close up the gap on the bottom here. You'll find that we're closing up this gap before we're ending up on the top on the other side up here. And that's not a problem at all. All we do is just continue going across the point. So basically we're going to start going into slots, you could say, that we've already used here on the bottom. That's not a big deal. If anything, it's just going to give us a bit of another layer and add some more colour. You just might have to look a little bit more closely though, to make sure that you're then going into the right one and not skipping one. Because obviously we have already got a layer of red in my case, so that can help confuse a little bit what slot's the next one, whereas it's easy to see up here for example. But just keep working with it, getting close to the top, and you can slowly start to see it's really filling in nicely, and what the final thing is going to look like with this colour. And I'm going to add some more after. But you could quite easily also just do something like this, fill it out with the one colour and leave it at that, or you could really experiment and do different designs. Almost at the top, and then obviously when we get to the top you still have to make sure you keep hold of it so it doesn't unravel. Just need to straighten my thread. Getting really close to the top now. Only a couple of slots left. You can see on the bottom here we crossed over to the other side. That's absolutely fine. I think I'm going to have my last one next. To the bottom and then up to the top slot. and get into the right one, which I wasn't. There we go. So now we're at the top slot, and I've got a bit of thread left. So obviously we can't just let go of this because the whole thing would just unravel. So what we need to do is secure this end in place, as well as basically what we did right at the beginning. So all I'm going to do with that is the tail that we have left is coming out towards the back. Now again, make sure you're still keeping a nice tension here, so it might help using the other hand that you're holding onto the piece with. Put the thread in between your fingers while you're then working with the end, because what we need to do is tie some knots with this. So I'm going to take this through the middle to be able to get into position to tie the knots, and pull it. I'm just going to pull it all the way through to begin with, because I want to make sure my thread kind of stays in the right place, in the right slot, and pull it back towards the top again. So just make sure you double check now before we start tying any knots if everything is the way you want it to be and it sits correctly. Nothing's jumped over or swapped places, and obviously we still have the tension as well. What I also just want to mention, you want to make sure to do is, as we're doing the threading here along the way, you don't want to be pulling too tight, by the way, when we're going across back and forth, because that can alter the shape a little bit. But obviously you want to keep a nice even tension. Just make sure you don't pull it really tight as you're doing it. But then I'm coming around to the back again, and now I'm just going to start tying some knots. So I'm going to get my end, go through the middle again just like I just did, but instead of pulling it all the way through, what I want to do is leave a bit of a loop on the other side, and then I actually want to go back through that. So I'm going around the frame and going back through it with the end of my thread here. And then first again I'm just going to do a single knot just to get it started. Grab hold of the loop here, place it up, get it in the right position, pull it so it sits there, and then we can pull the actual tail tight like that. So there we basically have the first knot, so it's more secure now already. You don't have to keep as tight of a grip. I would still keep hold of it until we're done, but it doesn't have to be as tight of a grip. Go through it again. Make sure you have your loop here, then go through it with the end of your thread. And now in this case I want to make a surgeon's knot, again just like I did on the other side for the extra security. So I go through the loop twice and grab your loop here, place it in the right place, the right slot there. Make sure it stays there, so keep hold of it with your fingers like this. It's really helpful. And then tighten that down. And then how many knots you do is really up to you. I want to just do at least one more single one, just to make sure that I really secure the end in place here. I don't want to risk it coming undone. And go through that again. Actually, I think I want to just finish this one in a surgeon's knot instead of a single, because these knots are a little bit different. They're more like hair pitches rather than knots with two lengths of cord. Again, place it in the right place and then tighten it down. So there we go. You can see I can let go now. And then all you want to do is grab your glue again. So I'm just going to use the same glue, and then right here where I've made these knots I'm going to glue that down as well, a little bit of glue on top of where the knots are, to make sure that when we cut off the excess of the thread, that is not going to come undone. It's going to stay nice and secure. So just do that, and then here we then have our first layer of our threading. So then once you've gotten rid of the excess thread there at the end, you can have a nice piece like this. You can easily leave it like this. It looks really nice, especially with the colour in the middle there. And then in my case I've used this silver wire that kind of frames it really nicely with that coil on the outside. But what I'm going to do though is take this another step, and I'm going to add in another thread, so another colour. And this is then where I'm going to take my silver thread, you can see it here, that again I've already separated this out from the main piece of embroidery thread. Again I'm going to go to the end because we need to attach it first of all, obviously before we can then start doing the threading. Then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tell you what you need to do. Now I want to find a place where it is I want to start from, and you can have that be anywhere. It doesn't have to be from the top, like I did in the first go. With this one I actually want to start further down, so almost a little bit, almost halfway I want to start. So basically what I want to do is get this end of my thread through the place that I want to start from, because what you find is you have little gaps between the threading that you've already done. Even though it's nice and tight, you still have gaps there that you can get the other thread through. Now you can either try and poke it through like this, so there we go, out on the other side, or if you need some kind of tool to help you, maybe tweezers or something will be handy. And then basically it's at this point where I want to start. So what I'm going to do is just do the exact same thing, take the end, tie a few knots here with the very end of it around just the frame on that point. So just choose what gap it is in the coil there that I want to attach it to and just tie some knots there. So do the same thing that I showed you up there, and then once I've done that I'm going to show you how we're going to start making the pattern. So now I've attached the thread there on the side, and then what we need to do is start working with it. And it's basically just the same principle as before. The only difference is I was starting further down and it's going to then look a little bit different. But what I want to do again is, if we kind of look, the midpoint is about there. You can kind of gauge it from this point now, the open part in the middle. What I want to do again is go to the same side that we started from, a little bit next to the midpoint. So I'm going to start somewhere around here. So basically almost if you follow the side and then further down, that's where kind of I want to start from. So just there, and then otherwise it's just the exact same principle. I'm going over the top of there, around the back again, stepping down one on the side, and then over one to the left on the bottom, and constantly moving into the very next slot, you could say, on the gizmo, down on the side here, and on the bottom it's over towards the other side. Making sure you're constantly grabbing the very next slot, you don't miss one out, because that, especially this is then the outer layer in this case that I'm doing, whereas you could kind of say if you've messed up a little bit on the inside one, in my case the red one on the bottom here, you maybe missed something around the bottom, this that we're doing now could help cover that up, so where you don't have to worry too much about it. But with this being the outer layer, I want to make sure that I get this just right. So I'm grabbing the very next slot all the time. That was the same one. So always double check. Grab the next one. Go around, back and forth, back and forth. And you can see it's starting to build up now here with the silver. So the exact same principle, but we're just getting this outer layer on top of the red, so it's going to then again give a completely different look than just having the red on its own, which of course you could easily do. Both ways are nice, and also you could keep experimenting and adding even more textures and layers to it. You can see we're building up on the bottom here. We're getting closer to where on this side that I'm doing it now, it's getting closer to where we're running into the same colour, and that is just the same principle. We just need to keep wrapping over that, because on this side over here that I'm wrapping around now, it needs to come up to the same point that we started on the other side, just so both sides are nice and even. Switch your grip if you need to. Make it more comfortable to work with. Also so you're less likely to maybe lose your grip, your tension on the thread there and having to start over. Which if you do is no big deal. See, we're getting really close on the bottom here, closing up that gap of the red. So that's the point where I'm at now pretty much. And now it's on the bottom there, again you just need to pay extra attention that you're grabbing the very next slot, because obviously we already have some of the silver down there, and there I lost my grip. So it does happen, so don't worry about it. You just want to pick it back up again. But what I'm then going to just do is keep going up on the side, and I already told you, you need to then stop when you look at your piece, the equivalent on this side basically is where we started out on the other side here. So then once you reach up to this side, so it's equivalent to the other side, you just judge that by eye. Then I've got my thread coming out towards the back here. And basically what we need to do now is the exact same thing that I showed you before. So we need to obviously fasten this in place, so keep nice tension on it. And just like we did up here to finish off the thread, what we need to do is do that down here. So basically the equivalent that we did on the other side, and we attached it. So I'll keep hold of it, nice tension. And again, what can help is use your other hand to keep hold of it while you're then using your dominant hand to grab the very end and then get it through the gaps that you have there. So they're just the right gap. So you want to maneuver it through there, tie a few knots, again add some glue, cut off the excess. And then once you've done that, you have the threading part done here. So there's no point in showing that again because I already showed you there. And then all that's left to do is add on the final earring findings. So I now got rid of the rest of the thread, and I've also attached my earring findings here, and I've done both of them as well. So I now have the pair. They're perfect for earrings. And obviously you can do whatever you want with this technique. You can also make a pendant on its own, that'd be quite nice. And obviously play around with your colour choices as well. But this is basically the basics of this style earring, I would say. So just one basic colour first, and then adding in another layer there at the bottom. And then I just turn them into earrings. And this thread particularly, because it's a bit metallic and has a bit of a sheen to it, gives a really nice play on the light, I think. But obviously you can use whatever you have and whatever you would like. So that's what the final earrings look like. So I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial and found it useful, a little bit different. And otherwise, thank you very much for watching. Hello there everyone. Today I'm going to show you how to make this wire woven bracelet where I've added in some beads along the way as well. And this is the final piece that I've made. So it looks like this. So I'm doing a regular wire weave here. This is the Aztec wire weave. And then what I'm doing though along the way is I'm adding in little seed beads to add this really big impact of some colour as well. It gives a really totally completely different effect, I think, adding in those beads. You can really play around with both the colour